today. Rabbi Tzvengel, as we all know, is a very chashuv Rav and the Oratora show in Skokie. I believe since 2008, right? And serves on many committees, the CRC and so on. And it's our great honor that he takes off his busy schedule to join us today and share with us some Torah thoughts. And today's topic is going to be about something very much relevant to many of us, or to all of us at some point in life, right? Which is growing old gracefully, and how we can learn different ideas from our avos and imois, and how we're supposed to view, and look at the old age. So please go ahead, and we are ready to start.
Thank you very much. Birshut Avi Mori. It's good to be here with my father up in Montreal, Canada, who from his office can zoom in. And it's good to be with all of you. I want to open today just by mentioning that I'm so privileged to live in a city and in a community with the Chicago Mitzva campaign. The work that the Chicago Mitzva campaign has been doing, and they did not ask me to say anything, believe you me, favorable about them. But immediately when Rabbi Libero called me, I said, absolutely, it would be a great zchus to be able to share some words of Torah with you. Rabbi Wolf Zozan Gesund, who, by the way, heralds from Montreal. So I just want to pointing out the Canadian lineage. There's something in the water, maybe, I hope so. Really does amazing work. And I miss him. And I miss being able to go into hospitals. It's been many months now, but I know that Rabbi Wolf and everybody involved in CMC has been doing unbelievable work. And also mention a dear member of Congregation Or Torah, Jill Laxer, who works with the CMC professionally. And I feel it's a real zchus for us, for our shul and our community, to be associated and affiliated with the Chicago Mitzvah campaign. Let's learn a little bit together. And I'm going to put something on the screen. It's not going to be too taxing for you to see or to read. I'll read it out loud. Probably many of you, if not all, on this call have heard about the passing of two great Gedolim. Each in their own right had Gedula in another sort of a realm. I should say, one of them was a great Gadol from a great lineage, Rav David Feinstein, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, who was nifter last week, still in the time of the Shiva now. And just to think what it means, this is a person who rose to prominence in his own right, who heralded from the stock of Rav Moshe Feinstein, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, and what that means. Also, we lost Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, who was an unbelievable spokesperson for Klal Yisrael, who was set on a path and a trajectory by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Zechat Tzaddik Kadosh Livracha, and Zchus Yagen Aleinu. And it influenced how many tens of thousands of people, Jews and non-Jews? How unbelievable that he leaves the world between Parshas Vayera and the Levaya is before Parshas Chayei, where Avram Avinu rises to his zenith of profile in terms of his interaction with the Ummos HaOlam, with the nations of the world. Look with me on the screen at something I'm sharing with you now. It's a section that, of all things, is the beginning of something that Rabbi Sachs wrote. It's in his book called Lessons in Leadership. He has a lot of different svarim that he wrote. So here he writes, a while back, a British newspaper, The Times, interviewed a prominent member of the Jewish community and a member of the House of Lords, let's call him Lord X, on his 92nd birthday. The interviewer said, most people, when they reach their 92nd birthday, start thinking about slowing down. You seem to be speeding up. Why is that? Lord X's reply was this: when you get to 92, you start seeing the door begin to close. And I have so much to do before the door closes that the older I get, the harder I have to work. Writes Rabbi Sachs, something like that is the impression we get of Avraham in Parshat Chayei. Sarah, his constant companion throughout their journeys, has died. He is 137 years old. We see him mourn Sarah's death, and then he moves into action. He engages in elaborate negotiation to buy a plot of land in which to bury her. As the narrative makes clear, this is not a simple task, and it goes on to describe how Avram Avinu had to be so active, even 137 years of age. It was hardly the end of his journey of what he had to accomplish and needed to accomplish. It doesn't take any kind of a scholar to open up the Torah portion of Parshas Chayei, and right there, Avram Avinu is involved, number one, in making this major purchase of Eretz Canaan, and again and again and again, to the end of Sefer Bereshis, it's going to be repeated over and over again by different people. This was purchased. This was purchased. Yaakov's going to keep referencing it over and over. It's going to keep coming up. And the second portion, a legacy to make sure there should be a next generation, a continuity. And Avram Avinu has something else that he does. He gets remarried. In Parshas Chayei Sarah, he gets remarried, which is a fascinating idea. It's a challenging thing to consider that all of these things happened in a short one parsha, not so short, but one parsha in Parshas Chayei Sarah. And by the end of the parsha, Avram Avinu already leaves the world. But look how much he accomplished in his older years. No one ever said to Avram Avinu, "Bezehibin and Svan Secure." He was already 137 when Parshas Chayei Sarah started. What do I have to say about growing old gracefully? I grew old from the time I was 4. Now I'm in my 40s. So I don't bring any wisdom of my own to any of these conversations. Over the years, our shul has talked about some of these issues, and in terms of some of the halachic parameters. I want to share a few brief lessons today in the time allotted, the next 24 minutes or so, for your consideration, just to think about in terms of what some of the Torah values emanating really right from our Parsha that can hopefully help us to think a little bit about the theme of getting older and to recognize at the outset that our view of getting older does not match the view of a youth culture. It simply does not. And youth culture, there's a lot to say about it. I don't have time now, but exactly Kishmo Kain Hu, a focus on culture as being about the young and not about the old. There was a certain rabbi from America. He went to Israel and he went on the bus. And when he got on the bus, he saw that every single time there was a younger person, they got up for the older people. And he noticed, of course, the sign on every Eged bus, Mipnei Seva Takum Vatarta Pnei Zaken. The Torah commands us this. It's not a nice aphorism that you should arise for someone who is of age, and you should show honor to one who is a Zaken, one who is an elder. That's the slogan. In America, I think in the subway, they have poetry in motion in the subway. Nothing wrong with it. In Eretz Yisrael, the bus says, remember, you get up for older people. The rabbi said, when I'm in America and I ride on the subway, I notice that the parents get up to make sure the children should be able to sit down on the subway, on the bus. But here I come to Eretz Yisrael, I notice that the focus is that the children make sure they get up, they can stand, and the older people should sit. It's just a different mindset. I'm not suggesting that Israeli culture today has entirely championed Torah values in this regard, but it's certainly in a different place in some measure than American culture, focused such as it is in a youth culture in so many ways. Look with me at the following and consider the notion found in, I guess, in Western culture. It's a quote from the 16th century. I referenced Montreal twice, so I'll put in a French quote. It's ascribed to someone from the 16th century, named, I think, Henry Etienne, I think was his name. Si jeunesse savait, si vieillesse pouvait. If the young knew, if the old could do. Yeah. A young person doesn't yet have knowledge, have wisdom, and the old person no longer has the ability to do. To me, Parshas Chayei Sarah turns it on its head. Yeah? So let's talk a little bit about some of the messages and the lessons just from our Parsha. There's much to say, but just to focus here. Va'avram zaken ba bayamim ba'Hashem beirach et Avraham bakol. And Avraham was old, advanced in days, and the Lord had blessed Avraham with everything. Now we could spend a lot of time. What's the everything? Today I want to talk about this one word, zaken. He's an elder. What does it mean he's a zaken? So the Psikta teaches us, one of the sources from the Talmudic era, Avram Zaken, the word Zaken, in English you would translate as old, but according to Chazal, this word is an acronym. It's 3 little words. Zeh, Shekana, Chochma, the one who has acquired wisdom. By the way, this is actually not just a nice idea, a thought, it's a halacha. When I mentioned before the mitzvah in Parshas Kedoshim, Vadarta Pnei Zaken, to show honor to the face of a zaken, an elder, doesn't just mean in chronological years. It also means in terms of their ability to have wisdom that they can impart to others. We learned that Avram Avinu, in his retirement, he didn't go to play golf. He went to learn Torah. Avram Avinu Zechkin, he was an elder. He went to go learn in yeshiva. And it tells us the pasuk from our parsha. Yitzchak Avinu Zechkin, he was old. Same thing. He went to go learn. Always learning. Yaakov Avinu was old, and he went to yeshiva. Can I ask you, don't you think it's a bit repetitive? I mean, I don't have to be the editor of the Gemara. No one asked me that it should be relevant, that C. Engel thinks that it's repeating itself. But it's not a siddur that you have to have a certain cadence and poetry, lo aleinu. This is the Gemara. Why didn't it just say, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, they were Zekanim, they sat in the yeshiva. Instead, we learn about each one individually, each one with their own pasuk, their own verse in the Torah to support the concept. But there's something else going on here. You see, I think each of them aged in their own way. The constant was they never stopped learning. They understood that whatever age they were at, and even when it was harder for them to get around, harder for them, they lacked the mobility that they once had. Okay, a nomadic Avraham Avinu settled in a tent eventually, and he had a home. Yitzchak Avinu was more sedentary in general. Yaakov Avinu traveled many miles toward the end of his life. He's 130. He has to move out of town. They're still learning. Wherever they went, they were learning. We learn also, though, interesting, that a main player in our parsha, Eliezer, Eved Avram, Zechkin, he's also old. And what's he doing? Should be yeshiva. He's learning in a yeshiva. Now, where's this yeshiva? This is not the yeshiva Shem Ve'ever. It's the yeshiva they made. Nobody had Zoom. Nobody had the internet. They didn't have a million podcasts and shiurim they could go to online from here and in Eretz Yisrael and all places of the world. But they sat and they learned. And this is an important idea, that even Eliezer, he was not one of the patriarchs of the Jewish people, but he learned from one. And he felt that wherever he was, he's going to also sit. And therefore, the very next verse in the Torah portion this week, after it says Avram was old, it describes that Avram spoke to his servant, who was Zechkin Beito. What is Zechkin Beito? He was the elder of the household. So one older person said to another old person, go, please travel some hundreds of miles and go find the shidduch. That is what happened. But here Chazal say that's not what the word Zechkin means. It doesn't mean that he was old. It means he was Zeh Shekana Chochma. He became an individual who had internalized wisdom. He acquired wisdom. If you want to acquire it, it's not easy necessarily always to do that, but each person on their own level should have a way to do this. And growing old gracefully, if you will. Again, I don't speak from experience yet, but I know it's coming. But I do take a model from various people without getting into details, but people in my shul, people in my family, that even in older years, they didn't stop learning Torah. They didn't stop expanding their mind and how can I connect and do better and be better. And I think there's something to this as well in terms of a mindset about the notion of acquiring wisdom as an ongoing process of living that is associated forever with learning. Yeah. So the story is told, of course, not a recent story, probably from the 1920s, maybe 1930s, that they found the rabbi sitting and learning, and someone quipped, didn't he learn what he needed to learn in rabbinical school? I mean, if you know anything about learning Torah, you know that this is a big joke. In the 1920s and 30s, it was a quip because so many people apparently didn't realize that the learning is a lifelong experience. They thought the rabbi is a functionary, so he knows already what he knows. I don't know many things. I don't know most things. So we're always learning. I remember in 2010, I think it was 2010 or 2011. I'm trying to remember now. I'm getting older. I'm forgetting. At the CRC, the Chicago Rabbinical Council, we were zocher to host Mori Rabbi Varon Lichtenstein's at Sal. So people were asking him different questions. And I remember he said the words, he said, we are all amaratzim to a certain extent. We're all ignorant to some extent. I almost fell off my chair. My Rebbe, Mori Rabbi, in my view, is like one of the, Zechkin Chochma. He's one of the greats of the generation. He thinks he has some kind of amaratzis, some kind of ignorance. Hayitochen, is that possible? Indeed, everybody should always feel they're learning. I thought it was astounding that my Rebbe would say that. He was already at the sunset years of his life. He passed away in 2015. But I took a lesson from it, that a person always has a sense. There are things that I don't know, many things, and learning is a lifelong process. So now let's talk a little bit about appearances. Again, many people have, of course, everyone wants to look nice. We should look nice. We're kalim, we're vessels of our neshamas given to us by Hashem. The vessels are also made by God. We should feel that we want to look nice. But if you ever complained, how come I look older than I used to? You can start with Avram Avinu. Ad Avraham, says the Talmud in Tractate Sanhedrin, there was no such thing as zikna. Ad Avram lo has zikna. Kol dechazil Avram amar ha Yitzchak. Kol dechazil Yitzchak amar ha Avram. Every time someone wanted to call Avraham, they would say, when they saw Avram, say, hello Yitzchak. And when they would say, see Yitzchak, the converse as well. Ba Avram Rachame, Avram Vinu Davant. What was his prayer? Dilahevele Zikna. He wanted to look old. It seems like a strange thing. I think most of Western culture is about chasing the fountain of youth. We want to look younger. We don't want to look older. Avram Vinu Davant, that should be older. They should look somehow older. The Maharsha here on the Gemara points out that elsewhere in the Torah, a number of times it referred to young and old. So how could it be such thing as old age? So the Maharsha writes here that actually it means, I put it in orange, that it just means that it wasn't obvious that someone was old. They were older. They had come on in years, but they did not ever have their hair color change. They never seemed to look older than anyone who was younger. And they seemed to be ageless, even though they actually were defined as being older. It was a question of appearances, if you will. There are other commentators that have different ideas about what this word means, but just the idea that our patriarch thought it was a positive to look different than children or to look different than a young person is telling about something that teaches us a lesson about its value. And not just for the purpose of identification between Avram and Yitzchak, but to recognize each person in their own age, stage of ages. More to say on it, but I'm just trying to be mindful of the time. The Medrash here describes Amar Rab Shmuel bar Yitzchak. It's on our parsha. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ani umanuti gomel chasadim. Hashem said to Avram Avinu, do you know what I do? What my work is? I do kindness for other people. Tafasta umanuti. You do what I do now. You have embodied this attribute of kindness, and you're bestowing the loving kindness on others. So you know what? Bo levosh levushi. Come put on my garb. For Avram Zaken Baba Yamim. Now, this is a very strange idea. We have a basic tenet in Judaism. Hashem doesn't have a face. He's not physical. So how could it be that Hashem tells Avram Avinu, come, you'll dress up like me? It's very strange to understand this. Of course, it's not literal. Of course, it doesn't mean literally that Hashem is old. If you ever said the tefillah, Shiur HaKavod, Anim Zemiros, so you know there are many descriptions of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, B'Sevav Shacharut, both looking old and young as well. Zikna b'yom din, uvacharut b'yom karav. Elder on the day of judgment, the day of Matan Torah, and at the same time, the day of the battle, youthful. It's reflective of a certain attribute of godliness in a person who looks older. It's not that Hashem literally looks that way. It's an individual who has taken on that appearance and that countenance is in a certain way emulating an aspect of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now I want to share something with you along these lines. For some people, it's very hard to go out and learn a lot. So learn a little. But one thing that every person could do, especially in older age, is chesed. To call somebody else. If you're lonely, somebody else is lonely. If you have something, you have ability to use a car, not during COVID, but generally, you have an ability to use a car to go visit somebody in the hospital. A person could take an attitude, it's too hard for me. Okay, so then that's one thing. But otherwise, to be able to visit with other people, to help them, to do things for them, it's astounding to me how much chesed could be done with a telephone and how much chesed could be done just to go different places to help others. And I don't want to mention names, but everyone in our community knows that they're yechidim in every single shul and every single community, that as they get older and they retire from the job, and they know what their job is. Their job is to be in like an Avram Avinu, sorry, Mena, they're going out to do chesed for other people. And you have right here, Hashem said, since you're emulating my attribute of kindness to such an extent, you should, so to speak, wear my garb. Now, this was picked up by the Tzemach Tzedek of Chabad. He picked up this idea and he discussed it in another context in Yoredeya, not for now, but in the description, and he was describing about beards, all different things, but he points out that there's an idea here that, of course, is nothing more than an allegory. It doesn't mean literally. It's al derech mashal. It's an allegory that we say, on the one side, there's no such thing as age with regard to Hashem. He's beyond time and space. On the other side, we describe Hashem as if he was what's called the Atik Yomin, which is an expression in Aramaic from the book of Daniel. It means God is the ancient one of days. And the idea here that an individual who's engaged in chesed is in fact daika on the word tofes, the umnut of Hashem. They're grabbing onto, or latching onto this attribute of Hashem. So that's what gets emulated. And therefore the appearance, so to speak, is al derech mashal, allegorically, can be compared to the appearance, if you will, of a Kadosh Baruch Hu in that gentle role of being Gomel Chesed. A third point. We've covered 2 points so far. Number one, about amassing knowledge. Number two, about the function of appearance, and connected to appearance is emulation. The third and final thought, transcending chronological age. Many of us know the Parsha is called Chayei Sarah because she passed away. This was the life of Sarah, and it was 120 years, describes it as 127. And Rashi very famously points out the connection. You can read it for yourself here in the English while I'm talking. The same idea of the connection between one who's 100 as if she was 20 and one who was 20 as if she was 7. All of these are connected to each other. There's some kind of a connection between these numbers in terms of the stages and phases of life. So I want to share with you the following idea. It comes from a book called Abraham's Journey. It's written actually in rather accessible English by Rabbi Yosef Dov Halevi Soloveitchik, the Rebbe of my Rebbeim, who writes the following in this sefer. In the realm of chemical processes, there is no way to retain biological youth in a middle-aged person, nor can the pattern of the middle age be preserved in old age. The sequence is strict and unalterable in the development of what we call organic existence or life. In the realm of the unfolding of the spirit, however, it is possible to see youth and ripe age, or even childhood and youth as simultaneous experiences. The advanced in years quite often display spiritual restlessness and intensity, and the young are sometimes characterized by cautious wisdom and sober judgment. An old person may be wonderfully childlike, simultaneously very old and very young, representing the aged, the adult, and the child. These are the lives of Sarah. She was always a 100-year-old mature person, a 20-year-old girl, and a 7-year-old child. J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan was a boy who refused to grow up and assume responsibility. However, Sarah at 20 was mature and fully developed both intellectually and emotionally. She was energetic, bold, and daring. Yet the adult in Sarah did not destroy the child. Maturity did not do away with childhood. In the deep recesses of her personality, no matter how developed, no matter how capable and brilliant, no matter how attractive and ingenious, always resided an innocent child. The adult might have reached the highest peak of intellectual greatness or growth. Her creative cultural activities might have been enormous, yet all that did not interfere with the secret presence of a child in Sarah. Notwithstanding the maturation of her natural wisdom, she retained within her the young girl she had been once upon a time. She acted like a mature, wise, experienced, rich, old woman. But in times of need and crisis, the young, bold, courageous girl came to the fore and took over. Avraham, like Sarah, was a child all his life. Avraham was extremely inquisitive. Every star twinkling in the Mesopotamian heavens mystified him. Every flower in the field, every drop of dew puzzled him. His curiosity made him restless. He explored the universe. He quite often failed to find an answer to his questions. He experimented time and again until the great mystery was revealed. Youth represents idealism. The young are committed unconditionally. They arrogantly defy the world. Avraham, like Sarah, was a youth all his life. He defied the society of which he was a part. He shattered the idols as an act of holy arrogance. He dared to be an iconoclast in a pagan society that worshipped icons. So in case your eyes glossed over because it was a lot to read, when the Torah declares that Sarah Imenu was 100 and she was 20 and she was 7, it's not a long-winded way of saying she was 127. Rashi tells us it's 3 comparison between the 3 ages. Rav Soloveitchik says it's not just that when she was older, it was like she was younger, but all of these things were happening at the same time. She could oscillate between one and the other. She wasn't fixed at her age, but there was a mental process going on that she knew how to go between one and the other in terms of how she was. V'avram v'sar zikanim b'ayim b'yamim, we learned last week's parsha, but the Medrash tells us they were old. Amar Rav Yochanan, kvar k'tiv v'avram v'sar zikanim, we already heard that they're young. What does it mean? V'avraham zaken, in our parsha, Avram was old. Ela she'ech zira HaKadosh Baruch Hu yamein arotav. Hashem had brought him back to his youth. Sarich lichtov pam shni, I had to say a second time, v'avraham zaken, that he was actually old. Because the first time that it said in the Torah that he and his wife were old, it wasn't actually true. Chronologically, that's how Hashem set up the world. But in terms of how he thought about himself, absolutely. He could go back to his days of being young. In the Gemara Baba Kama, it says that Avraham Avinu, minted a coin. He made money. He made like a coin. Ve'ezu matbea shel Avraham Avinu is like the honor coin you could have in your house, like the medallion from the Olympics or something, lahavdol. So Avraham Avinu made a special coin. I don't know if it was giving it out or if it was like this was the official seal of Avraham Avinu, but it's the coin. What was it? Zaken uzkeinu mitzad echad, ubachur betula mitzad acher. On one side was an old man and an old woman. When you flipped the coin, the other side was a young man and a young maiden, flipping back and forth. And Rav Soloveitchik develops this idea of the ability for an older person to flip back and forth from old age to youthful vigor and back and forth again. So those are 3 points about chronologically growing old gracefully. Amassing wisdom is a lifelong process of learning. The notion of appearance also means the individual carries themselves, as it were, as a representative of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, particularly in older age, in terms of the chesed that they do. And thirdly, the idea that old age itself can be transcended, as we learn from Avram Avinu and Sarah Imenu. The coin that is minted has 2 sides, and it can be flipped over and over and over again. Now a message for even the younger chronologically among us, but this is sort of to cap off everything else. In our relationship with Hashem, David HaMelech davens, Master of the Universe, we say this in Slichas every year, a number of times, many times, please don't cast me away at the time when I am old. When my strength fails, do not abandon me. Said the Baal Shem Tov. And the Baal Shem Tov didn't write very much. So these are 3 different quotes that are all in the same family of ideas, but they're variations. We won't read all of them. I'll just tell you what they say. They basically say the following. You see these 2 words, the time of old age? Le'et zikna means the time of old. It doesn't necessarily mean a person has physically grown old. It could be at a time when an individual wants to do a mitzvah, but suddenly they feel ponderous, weighty, lethargic, unexcited, unenthused by the mitzvah. That, says the Baal Shem Tov, is the 8 zikna that can fall upon any person, no matter what their chronological age. Master of the Universe, davens David Malka Mashiach, don't throw me away at the moment when I feel old, when the mitzvahs don't feel fresh and exciting and invigorating. Instead, Ribbon Shalom, take me up. Please support me, especially now. Encourage me to do this mitzvah, that it should feel new and fresh and young again. And I think there's a real message in here for each of us. The Baal Shem HaKadosh taught it here. Again, it's 3 different of his students who wrote this up, but it's in the Baal Shem Tov on the Torah. But it's on this, don't cast me out, Hashem, at the time when oldness, when that which feels aged, creeps into me and into my soul. Instead, support me to regain and recapture my youth. Rabbi Levi, do I have 1 more minute or are we over time? Tell me now, because it's 1:59.
Go ahead.
1 more minute. I'm going to close with this, and it's about this idea of Avodas Hashem. There's a Rebbe who I feel very close to. I've never met him. I'm not related to him. Many of you probably recognize the picture I have here on the screen. He was the Admor of Piasetzna, Rabbi Klonimus Kalman Shapira. He went by the nickname, after he died, they call him the Eish Kodesh. He died in the World War II. He was killed in the Shoah. He was the Rebbe, one of the Rebbeim, inside the Warsaw Ghetto, and many of his writings were destroyed. But many of his writings survived. They were buried under the Warsaw Ghetto. He kept a diary. Now, he died, he was in his 50s. So he didn't actually reach high ages by our standard, but here's the beginning of his diary. I want to share. I won't read it all inside, but the first thing he says is, I don't think he ever met Henry Etienne, who I quoted at the beginning. Si jeunesse savait, si vieillesse pouvait. He says it in Torah terms. He says, if only I could live another 70 years. We spend 70 years struggling to try to educate ourselves, to try to fix, to make upright that which is perverse within us, and to grow, to be greater within in terms of our internal growth. If only we could have another 70-year life, then we could live a life of purity, a life that is clear, even in Olam Hazeh. But after this life, suddenly we're no longer here. And he reflected on this in his diary. This is the opening of it. It's called the Tzav V'Ziruz. It was buried into the Warsaw Ghetto and was recovered just after the war. And then he gives us a charge. And I'll close with this charge. There are 50 pages almost of this, 50 sections, 50 paragraphs, not pages, 50 sections. But I'll just share this with you, where he says the following. Do you want to grow? So you don't want to be turning 70 in your life and you're just the same as you were in your day of your bar mitzvah. Women, bas mitzvah. So do this. Every year, make for yourself a goal. Imagine for yourself. Let's say he says your name is Reuven. So imagine what Reuven are you going to be next year? Fill in the blank. Sarah, what are you going to be next year? What do you hope to accomplish? Where do you hope to be in your attributes? How do you hope to be in terms of your character? This imaginary Reuven that you've held up, let that be your measuring stick. Figure out how much do I have to do to try to get there. Make it a realistic goal. And you'll come the next year, see, so did I make it or not? Did I actually get to where that ideal self of myself that I'm meant to be? Or am I just the same Reuven that I was the year before? Am I the same Reuven that I was 10 years ago? I'm still living the same way. And I'm not the Reuven of this new year as the year comes. And he closes with the line from our Parsha. And that's the last line for today. For Avram Zechkin Baba Yamim. Avram was old. He was coming into his days. Writes the Piasetzner. Avraham Shel Hayom. The Avram of today. Haya Shel Hayom was today's Avraham. Viloha Avraham Shel Etmol. He was coming into his days means that as each day was coming, Avram Avinu on his Madrega could set for himself a path of a goal. Who's the next Avram I'm going to be? How will I get to the next level? And through his life, and that's why it is toward the end of his life, that we recall this idea that he was Zechkin, Zekana Chochma, Zechkin, he had the face of Zikna, Zechkin, that he was an individual who through his way of being could flip between Ziknut and Bacharut, be old and young, and a Zechkin Baba Yamim, he brought his days with him, means that each day, this was the day of this Avraham, and he was waiting for the next day when he would be a yet greater Avraham, constantly growing, learning, and emulating a Kadosh Baruch Hu. So I thank you very much for this opportunity, Rabbi Libero. And I don't know if we don't generally do questions and answers in this session, right? Because we're already at 2:03, so I don't want to keep people, right?
We'll give questions, a minute for questions, just a minute if it's okay.
Okay, there's much more to say, but this is the Mitzamtzem, 30 minutes. Okay.
All right. So first of all, we want to give a special Yasher Koyach to thank you to Rabbi Engel, beautifully given over. And I think this is the way you explain growing old gracefully, is so beautifully explains for all ages. Again, I'm inspired, and I think everybody over here is inspired to have the right outlook on the older age, and again, even on the younger age, older age. And this concept especially is applicable to our times now, when COVID taught us that there's no such thing as being old. There's no such thing as being the way you were. Everybody had to change their lives in many different ways, in drastic ways. And I think this idea that you brought out gives us the insight behind it. So again, thank you very, very much. Just a quick reminder that we have our regular ongoing classes, Sunday through Thursday. We have our special tour around the Jewish world on Wednesday, and we have our guest speakers from prominent rabbis on Thursday. Please join us, and we'll give it now a minute for questions. If anybody wants to ask a question, you can unmute yourself. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. This
Yeah,
is
sure.
very,
Rabbi.
yes.
Amazing.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you for an inspiring drasha.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Wish everyone a good Erev Shabbos. We're getting there.
You too.
You.
Thank you.
Be well.
Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Take
Thank
care.
Thank you.
Be
Very
well.
good.